If you have ever asked yourself why your seemingly perfect partner, the person you chose and love, suddenly transforms into a stranger, cold, irritable, sometimes even hostile, at the most inconvenient moment, then this conversation is for you. You see before you the epitome of decency, success, and care, yet sometimes, especially in intimate settings or moments of crisis, something entirely different emerges. It feels as if a shadow is hiding in the bedroom, where closeness and trust should reign, distorting your reality and poisoning the relationship. We are talking about the fundamental puzzle that confronts every mature couple. Why do people not become more transparent to each other with time, but instead grow more layers of new, frightening, and illogical reactions? This is not mere tiredness, not just a mundane routine. This is something far deeper, something psychology terms unconscious confrontation. We are not seeking the other person themselves, but primarily a part of ourselves that we have lost, rejected, or whose existence we were unaware of. And when that part of the self emerges in the partner, it evokes not the joy of recognition, but sharp pain and rejection. For the mature audience, those over 40, this problem is particularly acute. By this time, we have usually built a strong, but often rigid mask. Jung called it the persona, the image we present to the world. We are successful, responsible, decent. But the more flawless our mask, the more material accumulates in our shadow. That part of the psyche which contains everything we deem shameful, unacceptable, weak, or simply the opposite of our conscious image. And here's where the most interesting part begins. This rejected material, the shadow, starts living its own life, seeking an outlet, and often finds it through the person closest to us. If you're ready to stop blaming your partner for changing or disappointing you, and wish to decipher the true psychological code connecting your shadow to your choice, then you are in the right place. Our channel is dedicated to deep self-discovery, the search for meaning and true maturity, not superficial advice. If you value honesty with yourself and depth of thought, support us with your like and subscription so we can bring this important knowledge to those seeking truth in their relationships. Today, we turn to the legacy of Carl Gustav Jung, the great explorer of the human soul, who first named and described those invisible forces that govern our love, choices, and conflicts. We will discuss two of his key concepts, the shadow and the anima/animus. These concepts serve as the key to understanding what is truly happening when your ideal partner suddenly becomes your biggest problem. Let's begin with the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as all those qualities, desires, instincts, and impulses that the conscious self decided to exclude from its image. These can be negative traits, anger, aggression, envy, laziness, but also positive ones that were forbidden in childhood. For instance, spontaneity, creativity, unrestrained joy, or strong sexuality. None of this disappears. It is placed in the psyche's basement, in our shadow. The harder we try to be good in society and in relationships, the heavier this shadow becomes. And this rejected material begins to project. The human psyche cannot endure the internal tension that the shadow creates. Therefore, in order not to admit these unacceptable qualities in ourselves, we attribute them to the person who is closest to us, our partner. We see in them the very aggression that we ourselves suppress, the very weakness that we despise in ourselves, or the very irresponsibility that we fear yielding to. Consider a classic example that vividly illustrates this mechanism in the bedroom. Let's say a woman who consciously positions herself as extraordinarily virtuous, self-sacrificing, and completely devoid of aggression marries a man who seems to embody her ideal of calmness and reliability. However, over time, she begins to notice and constantly criticize in him hidden passivity or an inability to assert himself in conflict situations. In reality, Her shadow contains a vast amount of unexpressed aggression and a desire for power that she has forbidden herself to possess. When she sees passivity in her partner, she unconsciously confronts her own suppressed part. She criticizes him for not being aggressive enough in business or firm with their children, but essentially, she's angry that he does not display the very strength that she herself forbade. Moreover, she starts provoking him into conflicts so that he will finally release her shadow, freeing her from the tension. As a result, in the bedroom, she may feel either suppressed or, conversely, forced to take on the dominant role, which only increases her internal resentment. Or another case, a man who has relentlessly built a career being incredibly responsible and controlling, chooses a wife full of spontaneity and creative lightness. At first, he finds this charming, but after a few years, her irresponsibility, her frivolity, and her emotional swings begin to irritate him unbearably. His shadow is his forbidden right to lightness, play, and irresponsibility, as well as a prohibition on deep, illogical emotions. He projects this onto his wife. His constant criticism is not aimed at her actual qualities. It is aimed at his own desire to shed the heavy burden of his perfectionism. His ideal partner becomes the carrier of his shadow, and he tries through criticism to destroy in her what he so desires, but is forbidden to have in himself. This creates a deep chasm between them, which is especially evident in the lack of emotional and intimate freedom. Understanding the shadow and its projections is the first, but most crucial step. The shadow always seeks the light, and the fastest way for it to emerge is through intimate connection, where psychological defenses are most weakened. From the moment we acknowledge that the core of our conflicts lies not in a genuine flaw in the partner, but in our own projected shadow, we must move on to more subtle and even more powerful forces that Jung called the anima and animus. If the shadow represents our rejected personal traits, such as aggression or weakness, then the anima and animus are archetypal, collective images of the opposite sex within our psyche, which significantly determine our choice of partner in our intimate life. The essence of the problem in the bedroom and in relationships in general is that we typically fall in love not with the real person, but with their projection of our inner anima or animus. Let us first examine the anima in the male psyche. The anima is the internal image of woman that contains all the feminine qualities that the man was unable or unwilling to integrate into his conscious self. A man who, for example, was raised in an environment that valued only rigid logic and emotional composure, his persona, was forced to relegate everything connected with intuition, emotionality, tenderness, and irrational creativity to his anima. He seeks a woman who perfectly embodies this repressed, yet yearning to be expressed, inner world of his. For instance, a man whose persona is the impeccable logician and controller chooses a woman who seems to him the embodiment of magical, ethereal emotionality and intuition. In the phase of falling in love, he idealizes her. His anima is projected onto her, making her a goddess to him. In bed, she is the key to his own forbidden feeling, to his deep, suppressed tenderness and spontaneity. He feels whole only when he is with her. But as the relationship matures and the necessity of solving everyday problems arises, this projection begins to crack. His anima, which demanded her to be only a muse and a source of emotion, collides with reality. The female partner turns out to be a human being who sometimes acts illogically, demands attention, and gets tired. All these less than ideal human traits are perceived by the man as a betrayal of his inner goddess. He starts seeing her not as his muse, but as a hysterical, irrational, tiresome figure who now carries a shadow, for example, his repressed fear of losing control. He cannot understand why his ideal partner became like this. The answer is simple. She did not become like this. She merely stopped being exclusively his archetypal projection. Now, let us turn to the animus in the female psyche. The animus is the internal image of man that embodies masculine qualities rejected or undeveloped in the woman's consciousness. In a culture that might demand a woman to be passive, caring, and emotionally dependent, her animus might contain everything associated with firmness, logic, conviction, assertiveness, and inner authority. A woman seeks a partner who embodies her ideal animus. For example, a woman whose persona is absolute nurturing and softness chooses a man who appears to her as the embodiment of impeccable, rigid logic and incredible inner strength. He is her knight, her animus, who will make decisions and provide protection. She projects onto him her own suppressed will to power and capacity for rational judgment. For the first few years, this works perfectly. In bed, he is the very strength and confidence she does not permit herself to have. But as the relationship deepens, the woman begins to notice that this ideal knight is actually despotic, inflexible, or incapable of emotional intimacy. Her internal need for independence, which was projected onto him as strength, now clashes with his real, human inability to always be right. She begins to perceive his firmness as aggressive tyranny and criticizes him for the lack of emotional warmth, which in turn is her own shadow. The key Jungian thesis we must grasp is that our intimate life becomes a battleground between our persona and our shadow, where the anima/animus act as mediators who first bring us together and then drive us apart. The projection of the anima or animus creates a powerful, magical attraction, love at first sight, because we finally see before us the embodiment of our inner wholeness. But once the real person protrudes through this projection, the magic fades and war begins. We try through criticism, manipulation, or sexual pressure to force the partner back into the framework of our projection. That is, to become our inner part again. For the mature audience, this realization should bring not only pain, but also immense relief. It removes the unbearable burden from the partner of being our missing link. This understanding shifts the focus of the conflict from the external, she is to blame, to the internal. This is my own psychological task. Only by acknowledging that the ideal partner was never ideal, they were merely a perfect screen for our unconscious, can we begin the process of integration. Integration, according to Jung, means that the man must consciously begin to develop his inner anima, intuition, emotionality, creativity, and the woman, her inner animus, logic, will, firmness. Only when we no longer need the partner as the carrier of our inner opposite can we see them for real. This is called ceasing to be an archetypal couple and becoming an individually mature couple. This integration process is especially vital in intimate life. Many couples find that passion fades or sex becomes mechanical over the years. This often happens because the magical element of projection is gone. To restore passion, we must not force the partner to be the goddess or knight again, but take back our own archetypal power and bring it into the relationship ourselves. A man who has integrated his anima is capable of being tender and emotionally involved in sexual contact. A woman who has integrated her animus is capable of showing initiative and firmness in her desires. This creates a new, authentic intimacy based on the meeting of two whole individuals, not two halves. The transition from archetypal projection to individual maturity is the most difficult, yet most important stage in the life of a mature couple. Jung called this process individuation. This does not mean that you must become perfect or that your partner must suddenly change. Individuation in the context of a relationship means that you withdraw your projection. You stop demanding that your partner be the carrier of your shadow or your inner opposite sex. How does one practically achieve this withdrawal of projection, which directly impacts the atmosphere in the bedroom and the level of intimate trust? The first and most effective step is the recognition. I am he, she. When you're intolerably irritated by some quality in your partner, their weakness, their emotional coldness, their disorganization, stop and ask yourself, where does this quality live within me? Which part of myself did I send into my shadow, and now I see it in them? For example, a woman who is enraged by her husband's passivity in decision-making must acknowledge a fear of my own power, of the necessity to make decisions and bear responsibility for them, lives within me. I projected my decisiveness, my animus, onto him, but now his inaction enrages me because it reflects my own internal helplessness, which I forbade myself to feel. A man who is driven to fury by his wife's irrational emotionality must acknowledge a vast amount of unexpressed feelings and suppressed tenderness, my anima, lives within me, which I do not allow myself to express. Her tears or her anger are, in fact, my feelings that she's expressing for both of us. I get angry because her emotions force me to feel my own forbidden vulnerability. This acknowledgement, I am he, she, does not mean that you become equally passive or hysterical. It means that you consciously integrate these qualities into your psyche, thereby freeing your partner from them. As soon as you recognize and begin working with your own passivity or your own emotionality, the need to project this part onto another, and consequently, to conflict with it, disappears. When the projection is withdrawn, your partner ceases to be a screen. You see them as real, a person who may sometimes be passive, but also kind, sometimes emotional, but also creative. You stop trying to force them to conform to your archetype, and this fundamentally changes your intimate life. The shadow in the bedroom often manifests as boredom or loss of passion. Many couples experience this because their passion was initially fueled by the novelty of the projection. When the projection disappears, they are left with a reality they do not know how to love. To restore authentic passion, Jung suggested the meeting with the body. Authentic intimacy, or the meeting with the body, requires that you integrate your anima/animus and shadow into the sexual act. The man who has integrated his anima is capable of being not only an active doer, but also a receptive, tender partner who intuitively senses the woman's needs. This brings a depth and genuine closeness into sex that goes beyond mechanical satisfaction. The woman who has integrated her animus is capable of being not just a passive object of desire, but also assertive, firm in her desires, and confident in her right to pleasure. She can clearly and without guilt express her intimate wishes and boundaries, which, as we discussed in the context of boundaries, is the hottest component of foreplay. When two individuals meet in intimacy, bringing their whole energies, not projecting, but offering them, a new quality emerges. This is not just sex. It is the meeting of two individuations. This means that the partner can see your shadow side, your aggression, your vulnerability, and not judge it, because they have already reconciled with their own. They can see your anima/animus, but not idealize it, because they themselves have developed their opposite side. This requires courage. It requires giving up the comfort of blaming. It is much easier to be angry at their coldness than to acknowledge your own emotional rigidity. It is much easier to criticize her for illogicality than to allow yourself to be illogical and creative. But only this conscious suffering, this voluntary relinquishment of projection, leads to what Jung called the transcendent function, a new, higher level of consciousness and relationship. Only through conscious suffering, through the voluntary relinquishment of convenient projection, can we transition to the transcendent function, a new, higher level of consciousness and relationship. This final stage of individuation, which manifests in mature age, represents not an end, but the beginning of an authentic, conjunctive life. After we have withdrawn our shadow and our anima/animus, we no longer look for what we lack in our partner. We look for dialogue. Dialogue, in the Jungian sense, is not just talking. It is the constant collision and reconciliation of two whole, yet contrasting worlds. We recognize that our differences are not flaws that need fixing, but an energy field that nourishes the relationship. The fact that your partner is more emotional than you, or more logical than you, ceases to be a cause for criticism. It now becomes a gift. They demonstrate to you the life you suppressed within yourself, and vice versa. The key tool for maintaining this transcendent function in mature relationships is symbolic expression. Since the shadow and the anima/animus reside in the unconscious, they speak the language not of logic, but of symbols, images, and dreams. To avoid the return of projections, the couple must learn to hear each other's language that goes beyond mundane complaints. For instance, if a woman has a recurring dream where her husband appears locked in a tower, her animus in captivity, this is not just a dream. This is a symbolic signal that her internal need for his strength and initiative is blocked. Instead of attacking her husband with a complaint, "You are always passive," she can share this image. This shifts the conflict from the plane of blame to the plane of joint exploration and meaning-making. The man, in turn, might discover that his own anima feels suffocated or invisible. For example, he dreams he is wandering in a desert. Joint discussion of these symbols allows the couple to understand which part of their collective unconscious currently requires attention and integration. In intimate life, symbolic expression becomes especially crucial. When passion fades, it often means that the symbolic energy of the shadow and anima/animus exchange has run out, and a new, individual energy has not yet been integrated. Passion returns when you bring wholeness into the bedroom. The man who has integrated his anima can bring tenderness, intuition, and receptivity into intimacy, symbolically expressing his completeness. The woman who has integrated her animus can bring initiative, firmness in expressing desires, and confidence into closeness, symbolizing her inner authority. This is no longer just sex for satisfaction, but an alchemical union where the conscious and the unconscious meet and transform each other. Thus, the shadow in the bedroom ceases to be an enemy and becomes a guide. It points to which part of your psyche has been rejected and urgently requires integration. If your partner irritates you with irresponsibility, the shadow says, "You are too responsible. Allow yourself to relax." If they irritate you with emotional coldness, the shadow says, "You are afraid of your feelings. Open up." For the mature audience, this signifies a transition from a therapeutic marriage, where we try to heal our childhood wounds at the partner's expense, to an individuation marriage, where we use the relationship for our own spiritual growth. Jung believed that it is precisely in mature age that relationships gain their true purpose, to serve as a platform for the self-realization of both partners. We conclude a deep dive into the Jungian psychology of relationships. The main takeaway is that your ideal partner is always the shadow and anima/animus in projection. True maturity and depth of intimacy begin the moment you withdraw this projection and start seeing your partner as a real person, not the carrier of your inner opposite. Stop trying to change him or her. Start changing yourself by integrating your shadow and your inner opposite sex. It is precisely this process of self-acceptance that removes the shadow from the bedroom and makes room for authentic, non-archetypal love. Call to action. Tonight, before going to sleep, look at your partner not as your problem, but as a mirror. Ask yourself, what in them reflects the part of me that I despise or fear? Begin this process of internal dialogue, and you will see how your external interaction changes. Remember Jung's words. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed. If this conversation about the shadow and true intimacy was valuable to you and resonated, please support us with your like and subscription. This will help us continue sharing knowledge about the deeper meaning of human relationships.